Aveline Mahira, Jonas Rezal, and Darian Rezal, three names bound by family, love and betrayal, but their story did not end in tradition or loyalty. It ended in a storm of secrets that erupted into bloodshed. A wife's hidden desires, a father's forbidden passion, and a husband's burning rage collided in one of Malaysia's most shocking tales of betrayal and murder. This is not just a story of broken vows, it is the unraveling of a family from the inside, where love turned deadly and trust became a weapon. Aveline Mahira was known across Kuala Lumpur as a woman of beauty and grace. When she walked into a room, heads turned, not only because of her looks, but also because of her poise and calm confidence. She had married Jonas Rezal 3 years earlier, and their union was celebrated as one of the grandest weddings in the city. The Rezals were an influential family, with wealth and reputation built through years of business success. To the outside world, Aveline seemed to have everything: a loving husband, a luxurious home, and the kind of life most people only dreamt about. Their mansion stood in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods, its gates guarding the perfect picture of stability and prosperity. To neighbors and friends, Jonas and Aveline were the definition of a power couple. Yet, what the outside world never saw was the quiet emptiness that had begun to settle inside Aveline's heart. Jonas was a man devoted to his work. He managed the family's real estate empire, often working late into the night, consumed by endless meetings and negotiation. He was determined to expand his father's legacy and prove himself worthy of the Rezal name. While Jonas's dedication impressed colleagues and investors, it left little room for his wife. Aveline found herself spending long hours alone in their expansive home, walking through the grand halls that felt colder with every passing day. At dinner parties, she wore her smile like a mask, but behind closed doors she would sit quietly, staring out from the balcony, wondering what her life might have been if love had meant more than appearances and financial security. The Rezal family gatherings were often the highlight of her otherwise lonely weeks. Jonas's father, Darian Rezal, hosted them with charm and authority. He was a man in his early 60s, silver-haired but still commanding, his sharp mind and charisma drawing people in. Widowed for over a decade, Darian carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen and lived much of life. To Aveline, his presence was both intimidating and strangely comforting. While Jonas was always rushing off to another phone call, Darian seemed to notice her silence, offering her a kind word or a sympathetic glance across the table. These subtle gestures began to mean more to her than she wanted to admit. At first, Aveline told herself that she admired Darian only as a father figure, someone who gave her the attention Jonas failed to provide. She felt guilty even for these small thoughts, but loneliness has a way of eroding boundaries. She began to look forward to those family dinners, not for Jonas but for the quiet moments when Darian would engage her in conversation. He asked about her interests, her dreams, and the things that made her feel alive. Questions Jonas had long stopped asking. Every time he spoke, Aveline felt seen, and that feeling began to fill the void that had been growing inside her. In the eyes of society, Aveline was the perfect wife in a perfect marriage. She dressed immaculately, attended every function with grace, and played the role expected of her. People admired her, envied her, and whispered about her fortune in marrying into such a powerful family. But none of them could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed work. Nights spent alone in a vast bedroom, days filled with silence, and a husband too distracted to notice her pain all left her vulnerable. She began to realize that what looked perfect from the outside was, in reality, fragile and hollow. It was during one of these dinners at the Rezal villa that something shifted. Aveline caught Darian's eyes lingering on her just a little too long, not in a fatherly way but with something unspoken. For a fleeting moment, she felt both exposed and desired. She quickly looked away, heart pounding, but the seed had been planted. From that night onward, she could not deny the strange pull she felt toward him. The world continued to see her life as flawless, but behind closed doors, her heart was moving in a dangerous direction she could not yet comprehend. By the end of that year, Aveline's loneliness had quietly transformed into yearning. The perfect marriage that had once seemed unshakable was now nothing more than a beautiful facade. While Jonas remained blind to the storm brewing in his own home, Aveline found herself standing at the edge of a decision that would forever alter the Rezal family's legacy. The stage was set for betrayal, and in the silence of her heart, she knew that once the line was crossed, there would be no turning back. Darian Rezal was not a man who blended into the background. Even in his early 60s, he carried himself with the strength and charm of someone much younger. His sharp suits, polished shoes, and effortless charisma always made him stand out at business gatherings and family functions alike. To the outside world, he was the wise patriarch of the Rezal family, a man who had built an empire and now enjoyed the fruits of his labor. But beneath the refined surface, Darian carried a loneliness that few ever noticed. His wife had passed away more than a decade earlier, leaving him with wealth and influence, but no true companionship. For years he focused solely on his business, rarely entertaining the thought of romance. That began to change the moment he realized his daughter-in-law was not only beautiful but also deeply unhappy. Aveline had grown used to the emptiness inside her marriage. Jonas was rarely present in her life except as a figure of success, someone she stood beside for appearance. When Darian first started paying closer attention to her, she dismissed it as harmless kindness. He asked about her hobbies, encouraged her when she spoke of her love for painting, and reminded her of her worth in moments when she felt invisible. What began as innocent conversations soon took on a different meaning. Aveline began looking forward to his words more than she cared to admit. Every subtle compliment, every shared glance across the dinner table, felt like oxygen to a fire she had long thought extinguished. It was during a late afternoon when Jonas had gone on another business trip that the boundaries shifted. Aveline visited the Rezal villa under the excuse of delivering some document. Darian invited her to stay for tea, and the quiet atmosphere of the home created an intimacy neither had prepared for. Their conversation flowed easily, and in the silence that followed, the unspoken attraction between them became undeniable. The moment their hands brushed, Aveline felt a rush of excitement and fear. She knew it was wrong, but the part of her that had been starved for affection for so long was unwilling to let go. From then on, secret meetings became their routine. They chose times when Jonas was busy, and places where no one would suspect. Aveline told herself she was simply filling the emotional void in her life, but as weeks turned into months, the connection deepened. Darian gave her what Jonas never did, undivided attention and the feeling of being desired. With him she felt alive, as if her existence mattered beyond appearances and status. It was a dangerous addiction, and the thrill of secrecy only added to its power. Aveline Mahira, Aveline's closest friend, was the only one who noticed the drastic change. Aveline had always been cautious and composed, but now she carried a spark in her eyes, a glow that could not be explained by mere happiness. Mahira grew suspicious when Aveline started lying about her whereabouts, claiming errands that didn't add up. Pressured by her friend's concern, Aveline eventually confessed the truth. Shocked and disturbed, Mahira begged her to stop before it destroyed her life. But Aveline swore her to silence, insisting that no one would ever find out. She believed she had everything under control, blind to the fact that secrets in powerful families rarely stayed buried for long. Jonas was not an oblivious man. Although consumed by work, he began to notice changes in his wife. Her excuses seemed rehearsed, her distance more apparent. He started questioning her movements, his instincts whispering that something was wrong. Jonas's suspicions grew stronger when he noticed the same perfume lingering in his father's home that Aveline wore. Though he had no proof, the unease gnawed at him, pushing him toward a truth he was not yet ready to face. Meanwhile, Darian himself underestimated the consequences of what he had begun. He saw the affair as a chance to reclaim youth, to indulge in forbidden passion. The thrill blinded him to the danger of betraying his own son. Aveline too convinced herself that as long as they remained discreet, the affair would remain their secret. But every lie they told, every stolen moment, wove a thread into a web that was tightening around. Neither realized they were setting the stage for devastation that would consume them all. What started as stolen glances had grown into a hidden life of betrayal. Each encounter deepened their bond and sharpened the rift. In their pursuit of desire, Aveline and Darian believed they had mastered control, but in truth, they were already spiraling toward a collision that would expose their secret and unleash a storm of rage, one that would end not only in heartbreak but in blood. Jonas Rezal had built his life around discipline, ambition, and loyalty to his family name. He carried the burden of maintaining the empire his father had built, and though it consumed most of his energy, he always believed his wife understood the sacrifices he made. For years he dismissed her complaints of loneliness as something she would eventually adapt to, but subtle changes in her behavior began to gnaw at him in ways he could no longer ignore. Aveline had once been affectionate, eager to share details of her day, yet now she seemed guarded, distracted, and often absent at odd hours. Her explanations felt rehearsed, and the spark in her eyes was one Jonas had not seen in a long time, except it was no longer directed at him. Suspicion crept into Jonas's mind like a slow poison. At first he blamed himself, wondering if his long hours at the office had driven a wedge between them. But then he noticed inconsistency. Aveline claimed she was visiting her friend Elira, yet Elira's social media posts often revealed she was elsewhere at the same time. Aveline spoke of shopping trips that left no new bags or receipts. Jonas's instincts told him something was wrong, and once the seed of doubt was planted, it grew into an obsession. He began checking her phone when she left it unattended, but she was careful, deleting messages and leaving no evidence. The absence of proof only sharpened his suspicion. The truth struck him like a physical blow one evening when he decided to follow her. Aveline had claimed she was spending the night at Elira's, but Jonas's gut told him otherwise. He trailed her car quietly through the streets of Kuala Lumpur until she pulled into the driveway of his father's villa. His chest tightened, every nerve in his body screaming denial as he sat in his car staring at the scene. Minutes passed before he gathered the courage to step closer, and what he witnessed through the window shattered the last piece of his trust. Inside, his wife and his father sat together in an intimacy that left no room for misinterpretation. It was not a meeting of family, it was betrayal in its rawest form. Jonas turned away before they could notice him, his mind spiraling into chaos. The sight replayed over and over, burning itself into his memory. Rage mixed with disbelief, then hardened into a violent determination. The betrayal was unbearable, not only from his wife but from the man he had spent his life trying to honor. It was as though his entire existence had been mocked, his sacrifices made meaningless. The empire he had worked so tirelessly to uphold now felt like a hollow shell, collapsing under the weight of shame. In the days that followed, Jonas became a different man. He could not sleep, could not focus on business. His once sharp mind was consumed with violent thoughts. Every time Aveline walked past him, he imagined the lies behind her smile. Every time his father spoke of family honor, he heard only hypocrisy. His anger built in silence, unnoticed by most, but those who were close to him could sense a darkness creeping. Elira, though unaware Jonas had discovered the affair, began to feel uneasy in his presence. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, the kind that hinted at a storm waiting to break. Jonas's rage became methodical. He watched his wife more closely, noted her patterns, and tracked her movement. He did not confront her immediately. Instead, he allowed his fury to fester, growing sharper with each observation. To him, this was no longer just a betrayal. It was war inside his own home. Darian's arrogance in believing he could take what belonged to his son only deepened the wound. Jonas resolved that there would be a reckoning, one that neither of them could escape. Aveline, caught in her dangerous romance, remained blind to the fury building under her husband's surface. She mistook his silence for busyness, never realizing it was the calm before destruction. Darian, too, carried on with a confidence born of denial, unwilling to consider that their secret could ever come to light. They underestimated Jonas, believing his devotion to work left him oblivious. But Jonas had already seen everything, and the fury inside him had transformed into something unstoppable. The betrayal had awakened a side of him even he had never known existed. Every day that passed without confrontation only made the eventual explosion more inevitable. Jonas was no longer the man defined by patience and ambition. He had become a shadow of rage, consumed by thoughts of retribution. The discovery at the villa had lit a fuse, and it was only a matter of time before the fire reached its end. What had been hidden in secrecy was about to erupt in violence, and the Rezal family would never be the same again. The night that would change everything began like any other stormy evening in Kuala Lumpur. Rain lashed against the windows of the Rezal mansion, thunder rumbling in the distance, as if echoing the turmoil inside Jonas Rezal's mind. For weeks he had carried the unbearable weight of betrayal, the images of his wife with his father etched permanently into his thoughts. The rage had grown unchecked, feeding on sleepless nights and endless replayed memories. By the time he returned home that evening, his mind was a battlefield between fury and despair. The sound of Aveline Mahira moving quietly in the house only sharpened his resolve. She was dressed as though preparing to leave, her perfume heavy in the air. Jonas's chest tightened as he realized she was about to meet Darian again. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He forced her into the car without a word, his silence heavier than any accusation. The drive through the rain was suffocating, the windshield wipers beating like a ticking clock counting down to destruction. Aveline tried to maintain composure, but the cold intensity in Jonas's eyes left her paralyzed with fear. When the car finally pulled into Darian's villa, her heart pounded, realizing there would be no hiding now. Jonas marched her inside, his fury spilling out like the storm outside. Darian, unaware of the storm about to crash down, appeared in the hallway with his usual calm demeanor. But the sight of Jonas dragging Aveline into the house stripped the mask from both of them. The hidden affair was no longer a secret. It stood exposed in the most brutal way possible. The confrontation exploded with words like dagger. Jonas unleashed the fury he had carried, accusing them of destroying everything sacred. Darian attempted to assert his authority, but his son's eyes burned with a rage he had never seen before. For years, Jonas had lived under his father's shadow, seeking approval, working tirelessly to uphold the family legacy. Now all that history turned to poison. Every word Darian spoke only deepened the wound, and every glance Aveline gave him confirmed the betrayal. Jonas could never forget. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing across the room, as if nature itself bore witness to the collapse of the Rezal family. In a blur of fury, Jonas stormed into the kitchen and seized a knife. His hands trembled not with hesitation but with the ferocity of his rage. Aveline screamed, but her voice was drowned out by thunder. Darian stepped forward, perhaps to reason with his son, or perhaps to defend himself, but Jonas moved too quickly. With a violent thrust, he drove the blade into his father's chest. The shock in Darian's eyes froze for only a moment, before his body crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across the cold tiles. The man who had built an empire and betrayed his own blood lay lifeless, undone by the very son who had once carried his legacy forward. Aveline stood frozen, her world collapsing in an instant. But Jonas's fury was not extinguished. The betrayal of his father had cut deep, but it was Aveline who had poisoned the sanctity of their marriage. As she backed away, begging silently for mercy, Jonas turned on her with the same knife still dripping with blood. Every ounce of love he once held for her had been consumed by the image of her in another man's arms, his father's arm. With brutal force, he struck her, the blade tearing through flesh as her cries filled the villa. She collapsed beside Darian, her life fading as quickly as the storm outside began to ease. The silence that followed was chilling, broken only by the dripping of blood mixing with rainwater that seeped through the open door. Jonas stood over their bodies, his chest heaving, his mind both empty and flooded with chaos. He had imagined this moment countless times in his sleepless nights, but reality felt even darker. There was no victory, no relief, only the suffocating weight of what he had done. The villa, once a symbol of wealth and power, had transformed into a crime scene soaked in betrayal and death. Jonas dropped the knife, its clang against the tiles echoing through the hollow house. The storm had passed,
But inside the Rezal family, destruction was complete. Without looking back, Jonas fled into the night, the rain washing over him as though attempting to cleanse his sin. But no storm could wash away the blood on his hands. The double murder was not just the end of two lives. It was the collapse of a family legacy, the obliteration of trust, and the birth of a nightmare that would haunt Jonas forever. The storm that had hidden Jonas Rezal's crime slowly faded, but its silence only revealed the horror that lingered inside the villa. Hours passed before neighbors, suspicious of the lights left on, and the unusual quiet, called the police. When officers entered Darian Rezal's residence, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Two bodies lay sprawled on the blood-stained floor, Aveline Mahira and Darian Rezal. Their lives ended in a frenzy of violence. The knife, slick with dried blood, remained where Jonas had dropped it, the final witness to betrayal and rage. Word of the tragedy spread quickly across Kuala Lumpur, sending shockwaves through the city. A family once admired for wealth and power had crumbled in a single night, leaving only scandal and blood in its place. Detective Ishan Kadeer, a seasoned investigator known for his persistence, was assigned to the case. He walked through the villa with a heavy heart, cataloging every detail: the overturned furniture, the broken glass, the smeared footprints leading out the door. The brutality of the killings suggested not only anger, but a deep personal connection. It did not take long for suspicion to settle on Jonas. His marriage had been strained, and whispers of Aveline's unhappiness had been circulating among acquaintances. When Aveline Mahira, Aveline's closest friend, came forward in anguish to reveal the affair she had been forced to keep secret, the pieces of the puzzle locked into place. Motive, opportunity, and betrayal all pointed to one man. Meanwhile, Jonas wandered through the city like a ghost. He abandoned his car and slipped into the back streets, staying in cheap motels and moving constantly to avoid detection. Each night he lay awake, haunted by visions of Aveline and his father lying lifeless at his feet. The rage that had driven him had dissolved, leaving behind only emptiness and paranoia. He imagined every passerby staring at him with accusation, every sound of footsteps behind him as the police closing in. His once sharp and calculated mind had broken, leaving him unstable and desperate. The empire he had spent his life working for no longer mattered. All that remained was the heavy weight of blood on his hands. Detective Ishan launched a manhunt, tracing Jonas's movements across the city. Security cameras captured fleeting images of him moving through bus stations, alleyways, and markets. Each sighting painted a picture of a man unraveling, his appearance growing more disheveled, his posture more defeated. For days, Kuala Lumpur buzzed with speculation. The fall of the Rezal family became the city's most talked-about scandal, and the public demanded justice. Journalists camped outside the family estate, their cameras flashing as if waiting for the ghost of Jonas to return. The pursuit finally ended at an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. Acting on a tip from a shopkeeper, who recognized Jonas's picture, the police surrounded the building at dawn. Inside, they found him sitting alone in the dark, unarmed, his clothes damp and his eyes hollow. He did not resist when they placed him in handcuffs. The man who once embodied control and ambition now looked like a shell of himself, broken by the weight of his crime. As he was led out, flashes from reporters' cameras illuminated his blank face, capturing the moment the city's most shocking scandal came to a close. In court, the truth unfolded in meticulous detail. The prosecution presented the affair, the betrayal, and the rage that culminated in murder. Alara testified through tears, recounting Aveline's confession and the secrecy that had trapped her in silence. Forensic evidence tied Jonas to the crime scene without question, and the defense could do little to shield him from the truth. The courtroom listened in silence as the story of love, betrayal, and revenge was laid bare. The jury needed little time to deliver its verdict, guilty on all counts. As the judge delivered Jonas's life sentence, the man who had once been destined to lead his family's empire stood motionless. There was no outburst, no plea for forgiveness, only a quiet acceptance that his life was over. The double murder had not only taken 2 lives but had destroyed the Rezal legacy, leaving behind only ruin. The story of Aveline, Darian, and Jonas became a grim reminder. whispered throughout Malaysia, that secrets once buried in silence always find their way to the surface, and when they do, they can destroy everything in their path.